And if you had business in or out of the city, you got in or out. But if you did not have business and you were a young man, and we had this spray, we had a spray called X spray and Z spray, we could spray your hands. And if it came back hot, like you had been working with C4 or TNT or Comp B or RPGs, we had you. You're an insurgent. And if you weren't, we made you think that we thought you were. And so anyway, McMaster did that. He cleaned Talifar out in months. So he's watching with great interest what's happening in Iraq, a town that he already took, a town that he lost men, taking and securing from insurgents, was given up to ISIS, and now it's being taken back by the Iraqis. So the rumors are flying that the Taliban are doing what they did 6 years ago, when there were talks both in Diego Garcia with the Afghan government and the Taliban, and then also Madagascar. The Taliban tend to go where we can secure them. They trust us to secure them, by the way. They do not trust the Saudis, and they do trust the Sultan of Qatar, but no one else trusts Qatar right now. The Saudis will not set foot in Qatar, so the Taliban aren't going there either. So anyway, the rumors are Mattis is on his way to confer with King Abdullah of Jordan, and have Abdullah possibly be the middleman between the Taliban and the United States, and whatever the U.S. says, NATO will do. NATO, by the way, politically, they would like a way out of Afghanistan. No one wants to stay there anymore. So we don't feel like there's a purpose in staying there anymore. And if it's to keep girls in middle school, to keep girls in high school, then you know what? If you feel that's worth American lives, then you go enlist your own ass and you go do it yourself. But losing Americans to try to advance a country from medieval times to 2003 is a losing proposition. We've tried it now for 16 years. So anyway, those are the rumors. Mattis is in the air right now. We'll give you his updates. All right, some North Korea updates when we come back. And the very, very poignant, sad story of the USS Indianapolis. Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, announcing today that the wreckage of the ship that delivered the atomic bomb was found today. We'll talk about that right after this. It is KFI M640, more stimulating talk.
It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk.
KFI M640, more stimulating talk. It is a dark secret place. Brian sits in here until midnight, and yeah, so that's the deal tomorrow. The Chargers with a 5 p.m. Another preseason game, and then we'll have the post game with Chris and Carlo right here. And if all things work out, then Super Hyper Local Sunday may start at 8:30. It might start at 9, but there will be a Super Hyper Local Sunday tomorrow night. There's D. Martin with your Glenn Campbell cover, Gentle on My Mind. So Glenn Campbell didn't write that.
It's not clinging to the...
all right. So the atomic bomb, the uranium one, the little boy, was the one dropped on Hiroshima. That was the one that was sort of cylindrical. And a plug of uranium was literally shot into a bored hole of uranium, causing that explosion. But we knew early on that was not going to be the mass-produced big-picture atomic bomb of the future. The plutonium bomb, the round warhead, like the Fat Man, that would be the model that was more efficient. But the uranium bomb, we'd gone to a lot of trouble. Thousands of people working hundreds of millions of man-hours to produce the little boy, so you're damn right it was going to be dropped. But how do you get it out to Tinian with the 509th Composite Bomb Group and their specially modified B-29s are? Do you fly it out there? Well, anything can happen if you fly something out there, and there's only one of these bombs. But what luck. The USS Indianapolis was damaged in April and March at the Battle of Okinawa and is back at Mare Island in Oakland. And it's going to head back out after a major refit. It's going to head back out to the Pacific, and it's going to go to Tinian. So why not put the little boy on the Indianapolis? So that they do. Indianapolis gets a secret mission. And Captain McVeigh is read into it. He doesn't know what the contraption is. He doesn't need to know. He just needs to know that there's a thing It is on your boat, and your ship is going to Tinian. You're going to drop the thing off, and then you are going to go on to your next mission, whatever that might be. So Captain Charles B. McVeigh III says, right, good stuff. Off they go to Tinian. So little does he know that the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine, the I-58, was patrolling those waters. The Indianapolis makes it to Tinian. They drop the bomb off. The crew didn't know something, by the way. If anything happened to the Indianapolis before it got to Tinian, literally the captain, Captain Charles B. McVeigh III, was told, before any man gets on a lifeboat, that thing gets on a boat. Before even you, Captain. Before anyone gets on a lifeboat, that thing is secured. So luckily that didn't happen. The bomb is delivered to Tinian, and Captain Charles B. McVeigh III and the Indianapolis sail away. They are, let me get the, at midnight and 14 minutes, 12:14 a.m. on the 30th of July. The Indianapolis was struck on her starboard side by two Type 95 torpedoes fired by Captain Mochitsura Hashimoto and the I-58. The crew, because it was incredibly hot below decks, and you can ask any World War II sailor about this, before the advent of really, compact, reliable air conditioning, basically the sailors would sleep up on deck. And that was the way it was for the Indianapolis. And so for that reason, when the ship was struck, more men didn't die below decks than normally probably should have, because the ship sank very quickly. So 300, a total of 1,196 crewmen were on the ship. 300 went down with the ship. In all honesty, it went down so fast it should have been 500 or more. But a whole lot of men went in the water. There were few lifeboats. Many men didn't have life jackets because they were not down in their berthing stations. And they were not at their general quarters, at their combat stations. They were up on deck. So they go into the water. The Navy had no knowledge of the ship sinking until survivors were spotted 3.5 days later. By 3.5 days later, after some 900 or so men went in the water, there were only 300 survivors. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Jaws, then you know that Robert Shaw gives that speech because he has a shark bite and he has a tattoo. And Richard Dreyfuss says, "What's that tattoo?" Oh, no, Roy Scheider, the police chief, says, "What's that tattoo?" And he says, "It's the Indianapolis." Then he goes on that very dark monologue about what happened on the Indianapolis. They dropped off the atomic bomb, they're torpedoed, ship goes down, the men are in the water, and the sharks start picking them apart for the next 3.5 days. Really an extraordinary and horrific episode in the U.S. Navy. So the survivors are found, they're rescued, they have horrific tales. The Navy is pissed. The atomic bombs are dropped. The little boy, which made it to Tinian, dropped on Hiroshima. A couple days later, Fat Man's dropped on Nagasaki. A few days later, Japanese surrender. Formal, actual articles of surrender and signing officially on the USS New Jersey. A few weeks later, war is over. But the Navy will not drop what happened to the Indianapolis. And they court-martialed Captain McVeigh. This is wartime. And he's sailing in a straight line. Now, the Navy ordered him to not get sunk, as they order every single captain, including the USS Fitzgerald. And that report came out, too. Remember that collision last month? Captain's out of a job. XO's out of a job. Chief of the boat's out of a job. That was incompetence all around, evidently. Anyway, back to war, and it's not even wartime. Back to wartime, the Navy had ordered Captain McVeigh, hey, don't get sunk, as they order everyone. Well, he got sunk, and the Navy wouldn't drop it. Why am I mentioning this, by the way? Because the USS Indianapolis was found under 15 gazillion thousand feet of water in the Pacific. Turns out rescue crews or search crews have been searching in the wrong place for years and years and years. But Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft and the owner of the Seahawks, as well as an alumnus of the Washington State University, funded the search, found the Indianapolis. So the wreckage has been found. But the saga Let's go back to 1945. When we come back, the Navy court-martialing the captain for getting sunk in an act of war. The dramatic moment coming up. The Navy goes all the way to Japan, and they bring the submarine captain, Captain Hashimoto, to Washington, D.C. as a witness for the prosecution. What will he say? How will he testify? I'll tell you the answer in just a minute. The saga of the Indianapolis now found after 72 years. Right after this, Dark Secret Place, Brian sits in here one more time. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk.
All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray, and the sky is gray. I've been for a walk on a winter's day.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place, Brian sits in here one last time. Never liked that song. So, back to July 30th, 1945, USS Indianapolis, which he was released today, has been found in the Pacific 72 years after its sinking by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, and his expedition found at some 15,000 feet, way deeper than the Titanic, but confirmed. There's actually a photograph of the hull number, 35, as a heavy cruiser and all that. It was transporting the atomic bomb to Tinian to be dropped on Hiroshima. By the way, for the record, you're wondering, how did the other bombs get to Tinian? The Fat Man version, the plutonium bombs that were dropped, the bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki, there were several of those made because we had more plutonium than we had uranium. Those were actually flown to Tinian because we had spares. So we didn't care if we lost one. So that's how those got there. So anyway, the Indianapolis has been torpedoed. It sunk so fast that the Radio Shack could not get a distress signal off. That was a big issue there. And it was not reported overdue. There were many straws that broke this particular camel's back, but the Navy decided to court-martial Captain Charles B. McVeigh III. So court-martial, they do. Charles McVeigh, who had commanded the Indy since November 44, he survived the sinking. He was among those rescued days later. In November of 45, he was court-martialed and convicted of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. Several things about the court-martial were controversial, but one of the biggest was that the Navy flew the Japanese submarine commander to Washington, D.C. to testify. Commander Hashimoto, who was the commander of the I-58, was flown to D.C., kept in a hotel, and keep in mind that the war crimes trials had started in Germany and in Japan, but the big ones in Germany. And so to fly the Japanese commander there was very controversial. Though Hashimoto reported that he was treated by the U.S. Navy almost as visiting royalty. He was treated tremendously respectfully. So Hashimoto spoke first. For his duration of his time in the U.S., he spoke through a translator from the Office of Naval Intelligence. He spoke first with the Judge Advocate, Captain Thomas Ryan, for 4 hours on the 11th of December. He spoke the next day with Captain John Cady, McVeigh's Chief Defense Counsel, for several hours. Both officers sought to determine his credibility. He told them that the visibility was good on the night of the attack and that he had been able to easily spot the Indianapolis. Then he testified in a court-martial. Hashimoto testified on the 13th of December in a crowded courtroom. It was the first time that an officer of a nation at war with the U.S. had testified against an officer of the U.S. Navy. At the behest of the defense counsel, Hashimoto took a Japanese civil oath and the U.S. Navy oath so he could be charged with perjury in both nations if he lied. His 50 minutes of testimony focused on whether or not Indianapolis was, quote, zigzagging to vex a submarine commander. He noted that the ship did not deviate from its course. However, he also noted that due to his position, such evasive maneuvers would not have diminished his ability to attack the ship. Still, his testimony is considered integral in McVeigh's eventual conviction. Charles Butler McVeigh was convicted and court-martialed. However, the court-martial was set aside. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz remitted McVeigh's sentence, restored him to active duty. He retired in 1949 as a rear admiral. It was nevertheless very controversial that the Japanese sub-commander that sank him testified. Many of the Indianapolis survivors said McVeigh was not to blame for the sinking. The men who lived, the 300 men who were pulled out of the ocean, said the captain was not the reason they were sunk. But the families of the dead did not leave him off as easy. He would get letters, especially at Christmas. One in particular said, "Merry Christmas, our family's holiday would be a lot merrier if you hadn't killed my son." So he had to deal with that. And he dealt with that until 1968, till Christmas Eve 1968, when retired Admiral Charles B. McVeigh III shot himself on his front lawn with his Navy-issued revolver. He was discovered on the front lawn with a toy sailor in one hand and his revolver in the other. He was 70 years old when he took his life. The submarine commander Hashimoto died in 2001, and he was one of several hundred people who worked as hard as they could to get McVeigh exonerated and restored. And that entire effort was taken up by a schoolboy, by the way. In 1996, a sixth grade student, Hunter Scott, researched the sinking of the Indianapolis, and he began writing his Congress members, and they passed the Charles McVeigh Exoneration Act. President Bill Clinton signed the resolution, and Captain Hashimoto died on the 25th of October 2000, 5 days before Bill Clinton signed that Exoneration Act. But that is the sad legacy and story of the USS Indianapolis, which was discovered by Paul Allen in a private expedition just a few days ago, and is the site of the bodies of 300 U.S. sailors who went down with the Indianapolis. All right, tomorrow night we'll get as much Super Hyper Local Sunday as we possibly can. The Chargers game starts at 5 o'clock. Be here at KFI for the pregame and the postgame, and then Super Hyper Local afterwards. So thanks to Hector. Thanks to Michael McVeigh. We'll see you tomorrow night here as soon as we can on Super Hyper Local Sunday, KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. Our own time for our PT test. But we always came there in uniform because we went out to the field all the time. We were never in PT gear. But we got there for first formation, and there were some officers that we'd never seen before, and they were not Nevada Guard officers, and they said, "Guys, get in your PT gear. If you don't have PT gear, get back out here in your underwear." And we got back out there in our underwear, and what they were looking for was tattoos. And the two guys who had just come off regular Army time at Fort Bragg a year before, they were there. They had even more ink on them than now that they got out of the regular Army. They had ink on their chests. They had Nazi eagles and things like that on their chests, and they had their tattoos on the hairline. I'd never been inspected like that, but we got inspected. And these four guys were pulled out of formation, and they were read a memo, and they were told that they were going to be processed but chaptered out, as we say in the Army. They were going to be chaptered out, and that they were going to be leaving the National Guard, and that they can appeal. Here's your rights to appeal. Here's the number for the Carson City, the JAG, for Nevada Army National Guard. And the battalion commander was the Attorney General of the state. He was on board with the whole thing, and I'd never seen that. But that's what they did. And I got to tell you, I mean, I agree with that. Whoever it is, whatever your insurgent group is, and you're in the U.S. Army, then you obviously didn't pay attention when they were giving the oath of enlistment or the oath of commissioning. I took the oath of enlistment, then I took the oath of commissioning. And I paid attention. And apparently Robert E. Lee didn't, because he broke his oath, and all the other Confederate generals did too. But so anyway, that kind of thing, though that seems kind of sort of Spartan and harsh, and almost like Roman legions. Well, that's what you have to do when you have a cancer like that. And the real betrayal of that is that, can you imagine what paratroopers in World War II, on the night of June 5th, 1944, about to jump into Saint-Mère-Église in northern France, can you imagine if you had tapped them on the shoulder and said, "Hey, in 1994, paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne will have Nazi tattoos. All right, jump, go, okay, bye, there you go. Have at him." We'll take a break and come back right after this and start talking North Korea. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight. KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. KFI AM 644 stimulating talk. It is a dark secret place. Brian shoots in here until midnight live, and then tomorrow we kick off a new era. Kick off, get it, with the Tackle Football Chargers of Los Angeles, the local franchise of the American Football Conference, kicking off their first exhibition game at StubHub Center at 5 p.m. against the Seahawks. And LA's beloved Pete Carroll is frankly not that beloved. So that is tomorrow. The game, and we all know that preseason games go a little longer, but whenever it's done and then we finish our post-game, then I'll do Super Hyperlocal Sunday with whatever's left of the balance between then and Coast to Coast. All right, so North Korea. Here's the deal, that Kim Jong-un has responded to President Trump. If you didn't pay attention last week at all, I'm not going to rehash things that happened on Monday and Tuesday. By now, you have already heard that North Korea will experience fire and fury, which, by the way, I got as knuckle tattoos. I'm showing you them on YouTube. As you see, if you're on YouTube at unsheepyourself.com, I'm showing you my new knuckle tattoos. Fire and fury, see? And I even got them right. All right, so the right hand says fire, and the left hand says fury. So when my fists are looking at you, it says fire and fury. So anyway, he raised the stakes by saying, "Oh, okay, well, we're probably going to do an operational missile test, and it'll go over the southern prefectures of Japan, and they will splash down somewhere 30 to 40 kilometers north of Guam. And we're looking into this," and that's how they phrased it. They said, "We're looking into working the problem so that these missiles will splash down 30 to 40 kilometers north of Guam." The minute they said that, I knew that the intent there, because that's really remarkable for them. For missile tests, they never give prior warning. This is what is really unpredictable about North Korea. Everywhere else, you heard me 2 weeks ago tell you about Fort Greely, Alaska, that the THAAD missile battery there did a test where a C-17 drops a missile under a parachute, it lights its motor, and it becomes the target missile. And to do that test, the United States issues what are called NOTARs and NOTAMs, notice to airmen, notice to mariners. And you give this really specific set of latitudes and longitudes that outline the launch box of the target missile, its expected re-entry and impact landing zone if it's missed, and then also the THAAD battery and all that. It's very, very involved, very sophisticated, and it has to be registered with international aviation authorities, weeks before a test, right? Same with Vandenberg. Okay, you go to vandenberg.af.mil, and the first thing you click on is upcoming launches, and it gives you all this data. Well, so the North Koreans have never done this, except for their satellite launches. They've never done it for their rockets, for their missiles. And so for the North Koreans to say, "Oh, at a time and place of our choosing in the next couple days, a week and a half or so, we are working on the calculations to launch 4 missiles that will splash down harmlessly in the Pacific Ocean." Now, they said, their own words, were that these are going to be dummy warheads. It's going to be a missile test, but with 4 missiles. And they'll fly it over Japan. And by the time it flies over Japan, these missiles will be more than 1,000 kilometers in space, maybe a little under. And then they will theoretically land just north of Guam, where witnesses will see them land. That's the entire point of why they're doing this. And how the United States responds to that is going to be the real test. Because the reason the North Koreans are doing it is because they know that this is not an act of war. Firing unarmed missiles into a test range in the Pacific, the United States does it. We fired 4 Minutemen missiles this year alone out of Vandenberg. That is our primary nuclear ICBM. And we've taken the warhead off, put a dummy in there. We've done it 4 times this year. Do you hear that number? 4 times this year we've launched Minutemen. So the North Koreans said, "Oh, we're going to launch 4 intermediate range ballistic missiles into the Pacific." And they know that they're not violating any international conventions whatsoever. So can the United States shoot those down without it being a violation of international law? This is the corner that the North Koreans have painted us into. because they're going to say, this is not an act of war, it's a missile test. What are you doing shooting our property down? That's an act of war, not us shooting those missiles. We'll be back right after this. More on this conundrum, this Gordian knot, if you will, that Kim Jong-un has tied across our pathway right after this. It's a Dark Secret Place. Brian sits in here until midnight. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian sits in here live until midnight talking North Korea. Here's the quote that came out on Friday as the threats go back and forth. The barrage of words coming from Kim Jong-un's regime are getting more laughable by the day after President Trump, this is from Town Hall, from Katie Pavlich at Town Hall, after President Trump reminded the North Korean government yesterday that the United States will overwhelm them with force like the world has never seen if they go after Guam. The North Koreans said, quote, "We consider the U.S. no more than a lump which can be beat to a jelly any time," close quote. The Korean Central News Agency said on Thursday. So, keep in mind, they translate things into English and we say, what? And oftentimes some of the things that we say confuse them as well, because there's a style of rhetoric in North Korea that doesn't exist here in the U.S. In English. And what they say in Korean oftentimes translates into this really bizarre, overly dramatic, bombastic language. But it's also how the North Koreans talk to their farmers and their factory workers. And they say, struggle, effort with greater strain than ever to produce and meet your goal. And it's all this old Soviet stuff. It's really weird to us, but not to them. But here's sort of the nuts and bolts of what's happened. We're in a era where the North Koreans say something about an upcoming technological development, then they display it at a parade, and then they